we have with us Sukumar Ranganathan. He's the editor-in-chief of Hindustan Times. And in his own words, he's a comic book freak and an amateur birder. Sukumar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Kumar.
Sukumar, you very recently wrote something which I think is very, very telling for the world of learning and development and organization enhancement. And I quote, you said, a long career in India's sprawling and bureaucratic health system or a medical degree of some vintage don't matter as much as an open mind, the ability to read and understand current literature on COVID, and then synthesize what that means in the Indian context. And I believe that what you're saying is not just true for COVID, but for any phenomena that we are faced with, whether it is AI, whether it is machine learning, whether it is pollution, whether it is new technology or digital marketing or new trends, because change is the name of the game. And what you're really hinting at, I think, has serious implications for how learning and knowledge transfer and knowledge creation needs to happen at an individual level and at organizational or at leadership levels. So elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, Kumar, this is a daily column, almost a daily column that I write on COVID, and I've been writing it for some time. And because I write it, I've been invited to speak in a few places, and the people who usually, my fellow panelists, our fellow speakers, are all people who are obviously much better qualified than me, right? I mean, they're all people who have been to good medical schools. Some of them are part of the country, are some of the country's top doctors. There are people who are running big public health foundations. So some of them are in charge of entire departments of the government to do with health.
Sure.
And I realized that while people get their jobs or what we do based on various factors, right? I mean, companies look for qualifications, they look for experience, they look for fit. But I think that is a very in situ or static way of looking at things. So great, you get in there, but then over the course of the next 5 years, and you're right, it actually doesn't matter which field we are talking about. It could be finance, it could be a high-tech area, it could be healthcare, it could be anything. I mean, it could even be geography, right? You take anything, you have to keep learning, right? I mean, there are things that are happening almost on a daily basis. And I say almost on a daily basis, it's a bit of an exaggeration because there are some areas where things obviously don't change so rapidly. Sure. But there are also some areas where things change very rapidly. Like you take the current pandemic, for instance. It broke last December, and now we are in November. One of my columnists who's a very, very erudite doctor actually did a back of the envelope calculation and said there are around 50,000 pieces of research that have been published on COVID in these 8-9 months, right? That's 50,000 pieces of research. Not all of them peer reviewed because some of them are published in what are called preprint servers, but quite a few of them peer reviewed. Now, how do you keep track of that? Because here is a disease unknown to man, unknown to science. So everything you learn about it is new. And there is so much literature that is being published on the basis of on the basis of really good work that is being done by top scientists. There are people even in India who are doing good work. There are a few papers that have come out of JNU, which I think have really broken new ground. But and I've been thinking about this, right? I mean, because this is just one tiny sliver that we are looking at. But obviously across domains, there is just so much that's happening, right? I mean, you take fintech, blockchain is disrupting fintech. Now, if you don't understand blockchain at all, and you don't know anything about it, and you also don't try and keep pace of what is happening, what are you going to do? Or you look at the whole the way in which information flows, right? I mean, social media has completely disrupted how information flows within a society. If you're going to have, if you're a policymaker and your rules and regulations are made for print papers, right? You will not even understand what is happening in this. And I think I've personally come to the realization that what matters is not the exact textbooks that you read in college, because we all went and right. I mean, I was in engineering college 30 years ago, and we all read books, and uh, things change. But I think what our education system, and if our education system doesn't do it, then we owe it to ourselves to do this ourselves. And if we can't do it ourselves, then the companies we work for will have to do this. Which is why, this whole concept of a chief learning officer, I think, is a brilliant idea, because I think it's something that all companies have to invest in. And what do they need to do? You need to make sure that everyone who works in the organization has got those building blocks of learning, right? And now these they could be specialized building blocks, they could be generic building blocks, right? I mean, what is an example of a generic building block? I would think that critical thinking is a generic building block, right? I would think that basic mathematics is a generic building block, because the ability to interpret data is very important across a variety of fields. So you have generic building blocks, and then you have specific building blocks which keep changing over a period of time, right? I mean, deep learning is, after all, a domain which is just 10 years old. So there's no way you could have had a generic building block for deep learning, but you can have a specific building block for deep learning. So you have to make sure that people have those generic and those specific building blocks which they use to, and then like I said in the column that you quoted, we all have to use those blocks to make sense of what is happening in the world around us. So everything that we learn, we have to synthesize it in a way that we can apply it in our own work. And do I see this happening? No. I mean, it's happening in some smart companies. It's happening with some smart people. But it is not happening across a lot of areas. It's definitely not happening in government, right? I mean, clearly, because our understanding of many things is fairly primitive, and I think we really don't get a lot of things, which is strange, because you do have a lot of smart people who are there in government. I just think, and this is true not just of government, but it's true of any system, right? I think it was Max Weber who said a bureaucracy is the most efficient form of organization, but he was German, and this was, I think, 200 years ago. Or right? so we will grant him what he said. I just think the business of getting things done becomes so important that I think people stop worrying about other things. So everything becomes a generic management kind of task. Whereas in truth, and you know this because you run a fairly cool company, there's nothing that is generic in today's world, right? I mean, everything requires tremendous expertise. Everything requires specialization. The era of the generalist is over. Today you have the era of the specialist and of the super specialist.
Changing gears, we often see that people during times of crisis, when the news flow becomes negative and sensationalized towards negativity, we will often hear people saying, oh, I'm just not reading the news anymore, I'm just not seeing television news, etc. Now, we know for a fact that what you consume, especially news media, can lead to an altered mental state, right? You can feel more depressed or anxious, or it'll change your worldview, to say that, oh, the economy is going to be going down, or, the market's going to be bad, so on and so forth. And if that be true, and, people are getting inclined to say, let me stay away from news, what really is the impact of news on mental health? And is it a self-fulfilling circle where you get negatively impacted, you behave negatively, or you behave defensively? Things don't, obviously, economic activity or whatever you're doing starts taking a turn for the worse then. and then again the news cycle becomes back. I mean, there is some truth to that.
Yes, there is some truth to that, but it's a it's a very interesting question that you ask, because you obviously aware of the pitfalls of just shutting yourself off from everything, right? Because
True,
then
true.
right, I mean, then you don't get the information that you really need to take
Yeah.
decisions,
And then we all
right?
become it's like an ostrich, right? I mean, we are
Exactly. So
in reality.
but at the same time, the scenario you laid out is also very true, in that there is a lot of news that is depressing. Some of it concerns things that don't really have an impact on the lives of people, but they still read it and they get extremely stressed.
True.
So I think, you know, there is a simple way out of this, and it's difficult to execute, but it's actually very simplistic in terms of uh, uh, what you need to do. I think what we all need to do is to curate our news choices very carefully, so that we don't miss out on what we need to get, but at the same time we don't get a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
And this is, see, unfortunately, many of us get, or not many of us, I mean, you and I are different because we do what we do. But I think there are a lot of people out there whose primary source of news is social media. Their Facebook walls and their Twitter timelines are pretty much how they get news. And
True.
there is this concept called the filter bubble, because the people I tend to follow,
True.
my friends on social media, are typically people with similar worldviews to mine. So I get just one worldview. I don't get the other worldview at all,
Yeah.
which doesn't help either. So I think if you really want, see, what are we interested in when it comes to news? Why do we consume news? Right? We consume news for two or three reasons. The first reason why we consume news is because uh, it helps us with what we do. It's news we can use, right? Either at a very, even if tomorrow there is an item in the newspaper, which part of Bombay do you live in, Kumar?
I'm at Carmichael Road. Yeah.
Okay, so tomorrow if there's a news item that says Carmichael Road will not get any water for the next 48 hours, it is something that affects your life. It is something that you should know, rather than wake up in the morning to dry taps, right? I mean, so at a very basic level, or business news that says government thinking of regulating companies that operate in the area of brain computer interface, right? Now, does that affect your life? Of course it affects your life, given what NeuroLeap does. But again, it is something that you need to know of. So there's a reason why a lot of people read news, and that is one, it's news you can use. The
Sure.
second thing, everyone wants to stay informed
True.
about larger issues,
True.
the macro issues which will affect us at a very macro level. Climate change,
True.
right? Do I want to know about it? Yes, I want to know about it. If there is a big conference on climate change that's happening somewhere where there are some revolutionary new discoveries that are being presented, would I want to know about it? Of course, I'd want to know about it. And then the third one is curiosity. I
Yeah.
want to know what's happening in this market. I want to know what's happening in this country. I want to know what's happening in this area.
Yeah.
These are the reasons why people consume news. Unfortunately, what happens is, because we've all become victims of the infinite scroll, we keep looking at, this whole thing that's going on, and we go into what is happening in Big Boss, what is happening on this thing, is Arnab in jail or out of jail, and you just completely get caught up in things that you need not get caught up in. I know it's like a drug, right? I mean, because
True.
it activates the same kind of chemicals in your brain that drugs do. A lot of this, new stimuli. So I need to this fear of missing out, right? I mean, you look at election news, for instance.
Right.
Why are so many people constantly refreshing the tally on their phones? It's not as if it's going to affect their lives.
And they're not even in that state. They're not even
Yeah,
remote.
you're not even there. So this whole thing of you're working from home, you're having lunch or you're doing something, and your wife is asking you to do
I think,
something, and you tell her, listen, let me check the Bihar results first.
no, I think there were more people interested in the US elections in India than in the US itself, probably.
Correct. Yeah, and I think it's so. I think my solution is you have to curate your choices. If news starts stressing you out, you have to decide that there are only these choices, these particular things that you will read,
True.
and and you have to stay informed. Like for instance, uh, I have a friend who works for Shell, who's probably the most informed person when it comes to these strange African countries about which we only know their names. And
Sure.
he knows their entire histories.
Yeah,
So I
because
asked him, why are you so well informed and in a very, very in depth sort of way? And his answer was shocking. He said, for at least 15 years, my job involved being on the rig for 6 weeks and being off the rig for 6 weeks. And he said, and when I was on the rig for 6 weeks, the only magazine we used to get on the rig, this was Shell, so it's a good company. The only magazine we used to get on the rig was The Economist. And he said, I used to read it cover to cover. So, yeah, an economist, will do a half-page briefing on Cote d'Ivory or Cape Verde or something in Africa. So you get to know those things. So you have to curate your choices. You have to do what you want to do. But I want to make one final point. It's not bad being anxious. It's
right.
not bad being stressed, right? I mean, there is something called the survival gene after all,
True.
right? I mean, in my particular case, I found out that when I get very, very not anxious, but when I'm getting multiple stimuli from a variety of sources and everything else, that is probably when my work becomes better.
Right.
So too much anxiety is not bad.
On that point, I'll just ask you one last quick question. Is what is the trend that you are seeing given the pandemic, and I think even before that, do you see more and more people now, senior leaders, etc., saying that, hey, I need to reprioritize, my life, what's important? Are you seeing a shift towards people saying, I want to invest more in my health, my wellness, my well-being? Is that becoming a priority?
To uh, to some extent, yes. I'm actually seeing a lot of people talking about it, and I'm seeing fewer people actually doing something about it, as it always happens. And you must have encountered the same thing, right? I mean, the number of people who are suddenly talking about, I will move there, I will do this, I will start doing this, I'm going to cut back on this and do this and all that. But to tell you the truth, I know of several people, including one young man in my office, used to cover the Supreme Court. He's a lawyer, very, very smart guy. Uh, Found a job that pretty much allows him to do the same thing from his home in Kerala. So he's moved back,
Right.
bag and baggage, because he said, I don't want to live in Delhi.
Yeah.
I wanted, this pandemic has made me reassess various priorities about family and other things. I just want to do this. And you're right. There are people who are taking these calls about, um, am I obsessed about sending my son to a particular college? Does college even matter?
True.
Uh,
True.
is why am I doing this job as opposed to doing something that I really want to
True.
do? So
True.
there are people who are thinking about this, and there are a few people
Right.
who are actually acting on it. But I think that if you go back um, in human history and look at it, I think life-altering events like COVID, because this is a life-altering event. None
True.
of us expected 2020 to be
True.
what it has been.
Yeah.
I think life-altering events like this do tend to have that change on at least some people. May not be on all people, but on some people. And I actually think that while we are looking at this from a fairly positive perspective, I think of people who entered the workforce 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and I actually feel sorry for them because we are all right, right? I mean, we started working around the cusp of liberalization. So as India grew, we had so many opportunities. Uh, but these people started work around the time of the financial crisis.
True.
And they are people who probably haven't seen the same sort of upward mobility that our generation has seen. And their life choices are going to be very, very different than our life choices.
Absolutely, absolutely. On that note, Sukumar, thank you so much for joining us and some great insights. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Kumar.